They were the picture of resilience. Lazarus was the broken-hearted father, picking up the pieces after an unimaginable loss. When Halo came into his life, she was everything he didn't know he needed: devoted, nurturing, and ready to help him raise his young daughter, Tamika. To outsiders, their story was a second chance at happiness, a patchwork family healing together after tragedy. But inside their home, shadows were creeping in. Halo's smile hid something much darker, and behind her tender touch was a festering obsession. As Lazarus worked to move forward, he never imagined that the woman he trusted most would become the architect of his deepest nightmare. And that little Tamika, the last piece of his first love, was in the deadliest hands of all. How does love turn into obsession? Could Lazarus have seen the signs, or was Halo always wearing a mask no one could peel back? And how do we protect the innocent when danger wears a familiar face? Before we dive into this devastating case, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more real-life stories of love, control, and betrayal that end in murder. Lazarus Dupree was a man carved from quiet grief, his every step deliberate, his every word measured. In the quiet town of Vicksburg, Mississippi, he was more than a funeral director, he was a pillar. The man who gently guided the bereaved through their darkest hours, who always showed up in tailored suits and a bowed head, who carried sorrow on his shoulders like it was stitched into his skin. But his own grief ran deeper than any he helped bury. 3 years had passed since Tamika, the love of his life, his high school sweetheart, the mother of his child, collapsed on their bathroom floor and never woke up. A brain aneurysm, sudden and merciless. One moment she was laughing at his jokes, the next she was gone, and all that remained was the echo of her voice and a daughter who looked just like her. Tamika Dupree, their daughter, was 7 years old now, bright-eyed and talkative, her long braids tied with glittery beads that clicked with every step. She had her mother's beauty and her father's quiet strength. She liked cartoons and banana pudding, hated thunderstorms, and refused to wear socks that didn't match. Lazarus spoiled her endlessly. Every morning started with pancakes shaped like hearts and ended with bedtime stories read in voices only she approved of. He called her my reason for breathing, and meant it. It was during one of those especially heavy seasons, when Lazarus's aging mother, Opal, began slipping, her memory a fragile thing, that Drucilla Hartwell walked into their lives. She was hired through a small agency to assist with Opal's care. On paper, she had the qualifications. In person, she was captivating. Drucilla was 29, tall and sharp-edged with hazel eyes and a body that moved like it knew how to get what it wanted. Her voice had a lazy southern drawl, soft and smoky, the kind that could turn a name into a song. She claimed to have grown up in Clarksdale, but her story shifted depending on who asked. One thing was clear: Drucilla was hungry, for security, for admiration, and most of all, for a life far from the one she came from. At first, she kept her distance. Respectful, cautious. But then came the lingering looks, the soft laughter, the late-night conversations over lukewarm coffee in the kitchen while the house slept. Lazarus, starved for adult companionship and worn thin by fatherhood and grief, let her in. What started as stolen kisses in the hallway turned into long nights tangled in sheets, whispering promises neither fully believed. She made him feel wanted again, alive again. But she wanted more. She wanted permanence. She wanted a ring. She wanted the front porch photos and Sunday church hand-holding. She wanted to be Mrs. Dupree. There was only one obstacle: Tamika. The little girl, polite but cool, kept Drucilla at arm's length. She never called her Mama Drew, despite Drucilla's repeated nudging. Never sat in her lap during movie nights. Never drew her in crayon pictures the way she did with her father. Drucilla was just Daddy's friend who came and went, sometimes too loud, sometimes too dressed up for a house filled with mourning. And Drucilla felt it. That resistance. That tiny, stubborn barrier between her and the life she wanted. She never said it aloud, but resentment bloomed. Quiet, creeping, poisonous. Lazarus tried to balance it all: his grief, his daughter, this chaotic new love, but he underestimated what was growing under his roof. To the outside world, he was still the grieving widower, the dignified man doing his best. He never brought Drucilla to church. Never mentioned her at work. He loved her behind closed curtains, in shadows. And Drucilla hated the shadows. She wasn't built for being hidden. She was used to being seen, wanted, worshipped. And with every kiss Lazarus gave his daughter goodnight, with every story read to a child who wasn't hers, Drucilla's jealousy tightened like a noose. And somewhere, in the quiet corners of her mind, a terrible idea began to take shape. Drucilla Hartwell knew how to survive. Her entire life had been a series of escapes, foster homes with locks on the fridge, boyfriends who took more than they gave, and social workers who never remembered her name. She learned early that to be wanted, you had to become what people needed. For Lazarus, she became soft-spoken, nurturing, submissive, at first. But beneath that mask was a woman hollowed out by abandonment, aching to matter to someone, to belong. When Lazarus brought her into his life, into his home, into his bed, something shifted inside her. For the first time, she wasn't just passing through. She was chosen. She was kept. And that meant everything. But Drucilla didn't know how to share. Tamika was gone, dead and buried, but her presence lingered in every room. Family photos on the mantle, the faint smell of lavender in the master bedroom, the way Lazarus spoke about her with reverence. And then there was Halo. That little girl with her mother's face and her father's heart. She was everything Drucilla wasn't, adored, protected, permanent. And that twisted something in Drucilla. She started wearing Tamika's old jewelry, rings left behind in dusty boxes, a pair of gold hoops Lazarus once said looked beautiful on his wife. She cooked Tamika's favorite dishes, trying to mimic the taste, the smell, the warmth. She tried to tuck Halo in at night, tried to brush her hair, tried to win her over with cupcakes and bedtime lullabies. But Halo didn't budge. She was polite, but cold. Her small body would stiffen when Drucilla touched her. She would smile tightly and say thank you, Miss Drucilla, never mama. Never close. Never hers. It infuriated Drucilla. One day, Halo came home from school and found Drucilla sitting on her father's lap, wearing one of Tamika's dresses. That night, she told her teacher, "I think Daddy's friend doesn't like me. She looks at me like I'm a problem." The teacher wrote it down, quietly, unsure what to do with it. No bruises. No marks. Just a strange little confession from a girl who didn't smile much anymore. Lazarus never noticed the shift, not really. He was exhausted, emotionally, physically, spiritually. Between running the funeral home and caring for his mother, he leaned on Drucilla more and more. She offered to pick Halo up from school, bathe her, help with homework. She said it was her way of showing love, of stepping up. Lazarus, eager for relief, said yes. And each time he handed Halo off to Drucilla, he told himself it was okay. That love, with time, would settle in. But inside that house, behind closed doors, the warmth was fading. Drucilla's patience with Halo grew thinner by the day. What began as cold stares evolved into harsh words. Then came the slammed doors. The withheld dinners. The little punishments Lazarus never saw. When Halo cried at night, it wasn't over bad dreams. It was over bruises on her arms she couldn't explain. Over whispered threats when no one was listening. Still, Lazarus missed it. He saw the fatigue in Halo's eyes but blamed it on grief. He heard her cry through the walls and told himself she'd adjust. He clung to the idea of a complete family. He ignored the dread in his daughter's voice when she asked to stay longer at school. He overlooked the subtle shift in her drawings, the happy faces growing smaller, the houses darker. Drucilla knew how to keep it hidden. She'd kiss Lazarus goodnight with the same lips she used to hiss insults into Halo's ear. She'd sit in church beside him, Bible in hand, while Halo shrank into the pew. She'd smile wide in public, but in private, her eyes were sharp, watching the girl like a rival. And the resentment, dark, bitter, insatiable, was no longer content to stay quiet. It was growing teeth. August 12th began like any other humid summer evening in Vicksburg, Mississippi. Lazarus Dupree kissed his daughter's forehead, adjusted his tie in the mirror, and told her he'd be back before midnight. He had a late embalming job across town, something routine. Something he'd done 100 times before. He glanced at Halo, sprawled on the floor with her dolls, and then at Drucilla, who offered him a gentle smile and a kiss on the cheek. He didn't see the tension in her jaw, didn't notice how her hands trembled when he handed over the house keys. By 7:06 p.m., Lazarus was gone. The house, quiet. Too quiet. Surveillance footage from a neighbor's Ring camera showed Drucilla pacing back and forth in front of the bay window, barefoot, wine glass in hand. Inside, Halo remained in her world of plastic figurines and whispered stories, oblivious to the storm building behind her. Drucilla stood there, watching, a fire in her chest that no amount of alcohol or prayer could cool. She'd been spiraling for days, maybe weeks. The rejection had begun to rot something inside her. All the forced affection, the fake smiles, the desperate attempts to wedge herself into a role Halo never wanted her to play, it had all failed. And tonight, it was too much. Drucilla tried again. She kneeled beside the girl, forcing sweetness into her voice, calling her baby, stroking her braids. She told her she loved her. She begged for something back. But Halo looked up with those wide, honest eyes and said 7 words that lit the fuse: "You're not my mom. I want my mom." Something snapped. The glass hit the floor first, shattering beside the coffee table. Then Drucilla lunged. She grabbed Halo by the arm, yanking her upward with such force that the child's dolls scattered across the room. Halo screamed, twisting, crying out for her father. Drucilla's voice turned sharp, vicious, spitting cruel words through clenched teeth, blaming a child for her own pain. She struck Halo once. Then again. Then shoved her so hard, the girl's small body flew into the wall with a dull, sickening crack. The house went silent. No more screaming. No more fighting. Just the sound of Drucilla's heavy breaths. Then the slow drip of blood onto tile. Halo was gone. What followed was chaos. A woman unraveling. She tried to clean the mess, grabbing towels, wiping the walls, scrubbing the floor as if she could erase the nightmare she created. She dragged Halo's limp body down the hall, wrapped her in a floral sheet, tied it tight with a neon green jump rope from the garage. Her hands, slick with blood and sweat, struggled to fit the child into the trunk of her Chrysler 300. She slammed it shut, started the car, and drove. For the next 2 hours, Drucilla wandered the Mississippi backroads. Gospel music blared from the speakers, hymns about mercy and forgiveness echoing through the dark. She cried hysterically, laughed at nothing, shouted into the empty car. She didn't want me. She never wanted me. She kept repeating, like a mantra. Like a curse. She drove past gas stations, parking lots, and country roads, all while her twisted reality settled in the back seat with the body of the little girl who had stood between her and the family she was never meant to have. By the time Lazarus got home that night, the house was dark, the living room cold, the dolls still scattered across the floor. But Halo was gone. And nothing would ever be the same again. The smell hit Lazarus first, faint but metallic, sharp like a warning. He stepped inside the house just after midnight, expecting quiet toys and sleeping silence. Instead, there was a puddle of something dark near the hallway. He froze. His eyes scanned the floor, then the wall, where a faint smear led toward Halo's bedroom. "Halo?" His voice cracked as he called out again. "Baby?" No answer. He ran through the house, checking her bed, the bathroom, closets. Nothing. Her backpack was still by the door. Her dolls untouched. The living room still carried the ghost of her laughter. Then the fear gripped his chest. He fumbled for his phone and dialed 911, the words tumbling out between gasps and rising panic. Within minutes, squad cars arrived, lights splashing red and blue across the Dupree lawn. Officers moved swiftly, securing the home, questioning Lazarus, combing through every room. When they pulled the neighbor's security footage, it showed what they feared: Drucilla arriving just after Lazarus left. Wine bottle in hand. Entering the house. But nowhere in the hours of footage was there any sign of Halo walking out. No tiny sneakers, no bounding energy, no little girl leaving alive. A bolo, "Be on the lookout," was issued for Drucilla Hartwell and her Chrysler 300. Patrol cars flooded the backroads. Hospitals were called. Cameras scanned highways. The minutes stretched into hours. And then, at 3:42 a.m., a patrol officer spotted the Chrysler parked outside a dingy roadside motel on the edge of Warren County. The car was quiet. The windows fogged. The officer knocked on the door of room 11. No answer. But they could hear soft sobbing. Inside, Drucilla sat on the stained carpet, her legs pulled to her chest, her eyes distant and glassy. She was still in the same wine-stained blouse from earlier that evening. Clutched to her chest was Halo's stuffed purple bear, the one Lazarus had bought her after her first day of kindergarten. "I just wanted to be loved," she whispered. She wouldn't let me. The officers moved quickly. No resistance. No struggle. Just a broken woman mumbling to herself as handcuffs clicked into place. In the parking lot, the trunk was opened. Silence fell over the scene. Wrapped in a bloodied sheet, tied tight with a child's jump rope, lay the body of 7-year-old Halo Dupree. Her face bruised, her skin pale, her braids still neat, frozen in time. The officer who opened the trunk stepped back in horror. A second officer vomited in the grass. Back at the Dupree home, Lazarus was waiting on the front porch, shaking uncontrollably. When they told him, when the words finally came out, he collapsed onto the steps, wailing into the night. A cry that would echo across the town for years to come. The town of Vicksburg would never forget the night its brightest light was stolen. And the man who thought he'd found love again discovered he had invited the devil into his home. The moment the story broke, the world took notice. Mississippi stations were first, local anchors with trembling voices, footage of the Dupree home looped on screen. But within hours, the national media descended. Vicksburg, a quiet southern town known for its Civil War history and scenic river views, became the backdrop for something far more chilling. Halo Dupree's face, sweet, brown-skinned, and smiling in her school photo, was everywhere. Candlelight vigils were held across counties. The words innocent, angel, and senseless echoed in churches, schools, even grocery store lines. But alongside grief came rage. Who was Drucilla Hartwell? Headlines painted her in extremes. To some, she was a wounded woman broken by a brutal past, a foster care survivor abandoned by the system, whose untreated trauma finally exploded. To others, she was a calculating manipulator who eliminated the one person standing in the way of her fantasy life. Court documents pulled back the curtain on her mental state. Dozens of texts to Lazarus were introduced as evidence. One read, "I look in your eyes and see her. You still wear your ring like she'll come back." Another, more disturbing, "She watches me like she knows I don't belong. Even that little girl knows you'll never let me in." The most damning came a week before the murder, "Sometimes I wish it was just us. You, me, no past, no ghost, no child between us." In the courtroom, the silence was thick as Halo's teacher took the stand. She recounted how the once bubbly girl had grown quieter in recent months, sometimes flinching when someone raised their voice. A neighbor testified that they'd heard shouting at odd hours, Drucilla's voice, sharp and angry, Halo's soft cries muffled behind doors. The trial became the most talked about event in Mississippi that year. Spectators lined up outside the courthouse before sunrise, hoping to catch a seat in the gallery. Reporters clustered on the courthouse steps, microphones ready, cameras rolling. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with tension, pain, and the weight of a life lost far too soon. Lazarus took the stand early. Dressed in black, his voice cracked as he faced the woman who once shared his bed and now sat shackled, her face blank. "I trusted her," he said, gripping the witness rail like it was the only thing holding him upright. "I let her near my daughter. And now, she's gone." The prosecution didn't pull punches. They painted Drucilla Hartwell as calculated, envious, and driven by a dangerous obsession. They played surveillance footage frame by frame, Drucilla's pacing, the wine glass shaking in her hand, Halo's small figure in the background, unaware of the nightmare about to unfold. They showed texts that dripped with venom and desperation. They walked the jury through every detail of Halo's autopsy. The broken bones. The bruising. The head trauma. The child-sized sheet. The jumped rope used to bind her. The defense leaned on Drucilla's past. A broken girl raised in group homes, emotionally neglected, starved for affection, untreated mental illness. They brought in psychiatrists, former foster parents, even a childhood social worker who testified she never learned what love looked like. But the jury saw what mattered, the facts. The rage. The attempt to clean the blood. The way Drucilla fled and lied. The way she let Lazarus discover the horror alone. After 3 days of deliberation, the jury filed back into the courtroom, faces unreadable. The verdict was clear and swift, guilty on all counts. First-degree murder. Child abuse resulting in death. Evidence tampering. Drucilla stood still as the sentence was read, life in prison without the possibility of parole. She didn't cry. Didn't scream. She just looked forward, blank as a tombstone, as the weight of justice finally crashed down on her shoulders. Lazarus wept into his hands. The courtroom exhaled. And the little girl with the sparkly sneakers finally had her voice heard. This case isn't just about murder, it's a mirror held up to the quiet dangers that slip past us when we're too tired, too trusting, or too afraid to look deeper. It's about how desperation disguises itself as love, and how unresolved trauma can twist into something unrecognizable. Lazarus Dupree was a man drowning in grief, clinging to what he thought was a second chance. Drucilla Hartwell was a woman who never healed, chasing a fantasy of family with a fire burning beneath the surface. And Halo, sweet, bright Halo, was a child who never got to grow up because the adults around her were too broken to protect her. It's easy to place blame in hindsight. But maybe the harder question is the one we avoid asking: who's watching the children when the threat wears a familiar face? So now we ask you, should Lazarus have seen the signs? Could this have been prevented? And most importantly, what do we do, as a society, to protect the most vulnerable when the evil lives inside the walls of our own homes? If this story shook you, like and subscribe for more real crime stories that uncover the terrifying truth about love, loss, and lies.